Hey everybody, Ultimate Oddball here. Today I'm going to discuss a study from 2009 which reviewed 40 reports published between 1990 and 2008 referencing autism spectrum disorder and anxiety. The results indicated anxiety is common in autistic children and adolescents. The researchers state that anxiety is likely to express atypically in autistic individuals, and thus assessment should include a variation of methods and information. They also note that there aren't enough studies on the subject and provide recommendations for future research. In addition, I'll be pointing out the irrationality of thinking anxiety is predominantly something which affects individuals considered clinically to be high functioning, and further share my thoughts on the subject. This report by Susan W. White, Donald Oswald, Thomas Allendick, and Lawrence Scahill reviewed 40 studies, with results indicating that somewhere between 11% and 84% of autistic children experience symptoms of anxiety. Two of the studies directly looked at individuals with a diagnosis of anxiety disorder and autism spectrum disorder. Quote, De Bruin et al. 2006 found that slightly more than 55% of the sample met criteria for at least one anxiety disorder, and Simonoff et al. 2008 reported an overall anxiety disorder diagnosis rate of almost 42%. End quote. Compare that to the prevalence of anxiety disorders among the United States population, which the NIMH says is 18.1%. Even considering the likelihood of the national rate being higher due to cases of lack of diagnosis due to stigma or for economic reasons, it's unlikely to reach the percentages mentioned in the reference studies seen in autistic people. Another important topic brought up is the expressional overlap between autism and other disorders. Axis 1 anxiety disorders, including social phobia and obsessive compulsive disorder, are rarely diagnosed in autistic people, they point out, with the symptoms being attributed to the autism spectrum disorder of the individual. There is a lack of agreement among clinicians as to whether various comorbid conditions should be considered separate from or a part of an individual's autism. Currently, there are many disorders which usually won't be diagnosed in autistic people, but would be diagnosed if that person weren't diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. As we've seen time and time again, there's still a fundamental confusion as to where autism starts, where it ends, and what exactly it includes. Unfortunately, I think it's very likely that the persistent focus on getting rid of autism and the accompanying research funding which has been spent on looking for a cure is holding us back scientifically from gaining a better grasp of autism. As I've pointed out in the past, the lack of an assumption of competence in non-speaking autistic individuals, as well as other bias, can potentially skew the perceptions of clinicians during assessment. Because of this, there seems to be an assumption that anxiety and other psychiatric comorbid disorders are far more prevalent in individuals referred to by clinicians as, quote, high functioning. Another study referenced, written by Gadow and colleagues, showed some interesting and relevant results. Quote, the authors reported that severity of ASD appeared to be negatively associated with psychiatric symptoms such that children with AD were generally rated as having fewer and less severe psychiatric symptoms, e.g. anxiety depression, than children with PDD-NOS or AS. I believe these results may indicate that diagnosis is affected by the same misconception which perpetuates the idea that those deemed low functioning by clinicians are unaware of the world around them. More research needs to include all autistic people, rather than allowing bias to dictate the format of studies. We need a fuller understanding of autism and the comorbid conditions associated with being autistic in order to better help and find accommodations for autistic people in general. Hopefully, as research priorities shift alongside shifting social perceptions, we will see more of a focus on these things and less on eradicating autistic people from the earth. Well, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for coming by, and have a great day. Hey everybody, Ultimate Oddball here. If you want to stay up to date with my videos, click subscribe. I release a new video on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I do gaming commentary and review. I talk about my experiences on the autism spectrum, and I share my opinions and thoughts on a variety of matters. My hope is that, through my videos, I can help to dispel some of the misinformation, confusion, and negativity people have regarding autism. Thank you for helping me do that by watching these videos.